Forum is proudly attended by participants from 14 countries all across Asia Pacific. So please kindly rename your username on Zoom on the right on the left corner. Usually kindly rename your username with name, the short version of your name, dash country of origin. If you can see my Zoom screen, my username is Sakdiyah Indonesia. Sakdiyah Indonesia. So kindly rename with your username on Zoom with name dash country of origin. Also, kindly throughout the session, put your mic on mute and open your video for maximum experience and interaction. Also, you can use raise hand, chat box, and Q&A box features for your comments and questions. You're also welcome, of course, to speak directly once allowed by moderator. And fifth one, this discussion will be conducted in English, so please kindly consult the organizer shall you need interpretation or other assistance. Lastly, the house rule, kindly enjoy the forum. We know, all of us know, 9 months down the pandemic, that Zoom forum is not going to replace a face-to-face forum where you can actually network with each other, but we really, really do hope that you will enjoy this forum. We will start very shortly. Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin with the opening ceremony of the CSO Forum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace be upon us all. Excellency, Coordinating Minister for Political, Legal, and Security of Republic of Indonesia and Representatives. Honorable Deputy of Foreign Affairs, Bapak Lutfi Rauf. Honorable Assistant Deputy for Asia, Pacific, and African Affairs, Bapak Pribadi Sutiono. Honorable Head of Asia Pacific Bilateral Cooperation, Ibu Reni Setiawati. Honorable Head of Middle East and African Bilateral Cooperation, Ibu Rahmawati. Honorable Secretary General of Asian Muslim Action Network, AMAN, Ibu Ruby Kholifah. Honorable President of AMAN, Professor Azyumardi, Azra. Honorable Board of AMAN, Ibu Huzaifah Yuniati. All of you, all of us here, honorable guests, participants of the CSO Forum from 14 countries, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend my warmest welcome to today's CSO Forum. My name is Sakdiyah Makruf, and I will be your master of ceremony for this opening ceremony. Allow me to share with you a quick overview of this forum. So the Coordinating Ministry of Political, Legal, and Security Affairs and the Asian Muslim Action Network are pleased to organize this sub-regional forum with the theme, After the Fall of ISIS, Sub-Regional Approach on the Returning of Women and Children and New Conversations. This forum will discuss some of the finding on strategic role of CSO in supporting rehabilitation and reintegration for women and children. The forum will also, as you know, facilitate exchange on views and possible solutions to deal with this shift because of the pandemic COVID-19 and the impact of the pandemic to the issue of terrorism and transnational security, among other issues, of course. Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, today we are honored to have with us 105 and counting male and female practitioners and researchers who are working in NGOs, women-led organization, working on PCVE issue, gender equality, peace building, women, peace and security, law enforcement, and other CVE-related issues to join us in the CSO Forum. This regional forum, the country of participants, if I may mention, we have Australia, excuse me, we have Australia, we have Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and the United States of America. Yes, so there are participants, many participants from 14 countries. Excuse me. Yes, and Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will begin this morning opening ceremony by listening to the welcoming remarks representing Coordinating Ministry of Political, Legal, and Security Affairs. Please kindly welcome Dr. Pribadi Sutiono for his welcoming remarks. Oh. Oh, ah, my deepest apology. My deepest apology, ladies and gentlemen. My deepest apology. Before we continue with welcoming remarks, my deepest apology once again, Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, participants of Sub-Regional CSO Forum. We will begin our opening ceremony by singing the national anthem. Please kindly step back a little from your computer, turn off your mic, turn on your video, and please rise for the national anthem, Indonesia Raya. Thank you very much. You may kindly be seated. Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. For our next agenda, kindly enjoy video screening of the CSO Forum, followed by video profile of Coordinating Ministry for Political, Legal and Security Affairs and video profile of AMAN, Indonesia. Please enjoy.
On 5th August 2018, the civil society representative from 9 member countries gathered at first CSO Forum of Lombok sub-regional meeting. They demand SRM to include gender-based approach in all CVE-related policy and intervention, creating transparent and accountable partnership with CSO, strengthen the role of interfaith leaders, promote regional collaboration to PVE, and promote of the protection of minority rights. The recommendation of the first sub-regional CSO Forum in Lombok 2018 was submitted to the second sub-regional meeting on counter-terrorism and transnational security that held on November 6, 2018 in Jakarta. The joint statement of the second sub-regional meeting highlighted 3 important agendas, such as strengthen legal policy and law enforcement cooperation, the role of civil society, and engaging media corporate to weaken terrorist network in social media. This year, the Asian Muslim Action Network, AMAN Indonesia, in collaboration with the Coordinating Ministry for Political, Legal and Security Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, are pleased to organize the third sub-regional CSO Forum as continuation of previous sub-regional CSO Forum, which was held in Lombok in 2018, as well as CNCSO and AEPG Strategic Dialogue in Bali in 2019. This forum is designed as an effective consultation mechanism among practitioners, academicians, media, women-led organizations, youth groups, and interfaith communities to consolidate their views on finding short and long-term possible solutions to deal with the new era after the fall of ISIS.
Indonesia, the largest archipelago country in the world, more than 17,000 islands spread from Sabang to Merauke. A country that is rich in various languages and ethnic groups. Difference and diversity must still be maintained in the power of unity. For this reason, politics, law, and security must always be well coordinated. The Coordinating Ministry for Political, Legal and Security Affairs is at the forefront of maintaining stability. Kemenkopolhukam has been present since 1978 during the President Suharto era. Since its inception until now, it consists of 16 coordinating ministers who lead this ministry. Even though it's headed by a different leader, but in carrying out its duties, the Ministry of Political, Legal and Security Affairs has relatively the same structure. One of them is Deputy Element. Deputy 1 is a unit that coordinates the domestic political sector, including the management of elections, regional and spatial autonomy, as well as coordination of strengthening democracy that is able to make achievements by producing a fairly good Indonesian Democracy Index. Next, Deputy 2, which was in charge of coordinating the field of foreign policy, always try to increase Indonesia's participation in world peace, protect Indonesian citizens abroad, and strengthen international, bilateral, regional, and multilateral cooperation. Furthermore, Deputy 3 coordinates in the field of law and human rights. This deputy is tasked with coordinating the development of the legal apparatus. Deputy 4, which is in charge of coordinating the field of national defense, is tasked with coordinating the fulfillment of the minimum essential force, enhancing defense and defense cooperation, as well as managing the security of the border areas and outer islands. Kemenkopolhukam through Deputy 4 has become one of the elements of the government that helps the success of the border development. In addition, Deputy 5, which coordinates the field of security and public order, is tasked with coordinating the handling of transnational crime and terrorism, security of vital objects and transportation, as well as handling of conflicts and contingencies. Lastly, Deputy 6 coordinating the national unity are tasked with consolidating the unity of the nation, reinforcing diversity, and strengthening the character of the nation. All integrated elements of the Ministry of Political, Legal, and Security Affairs are able to carry out and establish coordination and can create political stability, guarantee law enforcement, and security in Indonesia.
Indonesia, sebuah bangsa yang terdiri dari berbagai budaya, agama, dan suku bangsa. Sejak era Nusantara hingga negara kesatuan, masyarakatnya hidup harmonis dalam kebinekaan. Meski berbeda-beda, tapi saling menjaga persaudaraan, menjunjung tinggi nilai-nilai toleransi, saling merawat perdamaian dan persatuan. Namun kita juga harus selalu waspada bahwa ada berbagai tantangan dan ancaman yang berpotensi mengoyak persaudaraan, persatuan, dan juga kedamaian yang senantiasa mengintai kita setiap saat. Di tengah berbagai tantangan dan ancaman, kita patut bersyukur bahwa perempuan Indonesia terbukti mampu melakukan rekonsiliasi, mampu mengolah budaya lokal untuk menciptakan perdamaian, mampu mendorong perdamaian di tengah masyarakatnya, dan mampu membawa perubahan dalam keluarganya. Untuk itulah AMAN Indonesia hadir. Kami percaya bahwa bekerja dengan perempuan lintas iman akan mendekatkan kami dengan narasi kehidupan. Kami sangat yakin dengan memperkuat kepemimpinan perempuan akan memperkuat kepemimpinan di keluarga dan komunitas. Perempuan Indonesia secara genuin merupakan pembawa misi damai. Mengenali dan mempromosikan peran perempuan berarti membuka dan memperkuat persaudaraan, persatuan, dan juga perdamaian di Indonesia. Di bawah cita-cita besar untuk menciptakan budaya beragama yang anti kekerasan dan berkeadilan gender, AMAN Indonesia melakukan 4 strategi penting untuk mewujudkannya. Kami memfasilitasi penguatan kepemimpinan perempuan dan organisasi untuk mendorong daya lenting dan daya tangkal masyarakat dari konflik dan pengaruh radikalisme, dan juga untuk mendorong lintas aktor bekerjasama untuk menjadi kohesi sosial. Kami membangun simpul gerakan dari berbagai kelompok dan organisasi independen untuk membela hak asasi manusia dan perempuan, penguatan toleransi dan perdamaian, serta pencegahan kekerasan berbasis ekstremisme, mulai dari tingkat daerah, nasional hingga regional. Kami melakukan advokasi mulai dari tingkat lokal, nasional hingga internasional dalam menyelesaikan berbagai kasus kekerasan seksual, kekerasan berbasis gender dan agama, menjadikan pembelajaran dari masyarakat arus bawah sebagai bahan informasi, pengetahuan, dan diplomasi yang dapat menyatukan berbagai pihak. Kami juga memproduksi dan menyebarkan kembali penafsiran dan praktek keagamaan dengan perspektif pembelaan terhadap hak-hak perempuan, individu, maupun berbagai kelompok yang mengalami berbagai bentuk kekerasan. Sejak 1 Maret tahun 2007, AMAN Indonesia telah bekerja di berbagai wilayah dan bekerja dengan berbagai pihak untuk menjadi rumah bersama, membumikan Islam rahmatan lil alamin.
Aku lagi tes. Kak Sakdiyah masih mute.
Excuse me. Yes, thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you enjoy the previous videos, the profile of our coordinating ministry for political, legal, and security affairs, and also AMAN Indonesia. I'm sure that all of you are familiar with both institutions, but I hope that those quick highlights, the video highlights, will also make you more familiar with the work of the two institutions. Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this event is proudly supported and co-organized by Coordinating Ministry of Political, Legal, Security Affairs of Republic of Indonesia. And now I would like to warmly welcome for our first welcoming remarks representing Coordinating Ministry for Political, Legal, and Security Affairs, our Assistant Deputy for Asia, Pacific, and African Affairs. Please welcome on the screen Dr. Pribadi Sutiono.
Thank you very much, Sakdiyah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
Salam
warahmatullahi
sejahtera
wabarakatuh.
untuk kita semua. Salam. President of AMAN, Professor Azyumardi Azra, my mentor, my guru actually, and also the Secretary General of AMAN, Ibu Kholifah, distinguished participants, colleagues. It is indeed a great pleasure to attend this forum, even in a future way, since the COVID pandemic now 19 still around us. This forum is indeed very timely and very important, because as we understand that the fall of ISIS create a new challenge to all of the country in the world. In fact, as we meet today, there are still many of ex-ISIS combatants and their families live in various camps, including in Al-Hoj and Al-Roj in Syria. And also many of them, especially the combatants, either in these camps or fled to other countries and trying to set up a new base to their terrorist activities. While the family, especially women and children, are seeking ways to return to their country. Many of the women and children are unable to return, either because they do not have money to pay to the authority in the camp. The authority, what I meant here is, it's not actually the authority of the Syria, or the country of the origin refused to accept them back. In Southeast Asia itself, for example, the policy of Malaysia, for example, or the Philippines or Indonesia, they adopted a different policies. In Indonesia, for example, public discourses are also influenced the government to react to this phenomena. Ladies and gentlemen, in Indonesia, I think more than 75% of the public refuse to accept them back. But recently, the government of Indonesia adopting a policy of accepting children under 10 years old, the orphanage children without parents, without father and mother, to return to Indonesia. And for sure, they can be accepted through a certain process. Distinguished participants, actually the challenge is not only on how to return them, on how to find a return policy of them, but also on how to handle them once they are returned. This is one of the reasons why we have this forum today, to find a concerted effort to handle those who are returned. The effort is not only between the governments, but also as important is between the government and the CSO. As we know, the CSO also play a very significant role in handling this kind of issues. And in fact, in my personal opinion, CSO is indeed those who play a very important role in the grassroots level. So this is our hope that through this forum, we can find a concerted policy, if we can find it, and that is able to implement on the ground, not only on how we return them, but also how we can reintegrate them, but for sure to rehabilitate them in the country. So without further ado, I would like to thank you for sure for AMAN for this forum, and also for sure our colleague from the Coordinating Ministry of Political, Legal and Security Affairs of Indonesia, as well as all the distinguished participants. I'm sure that through this forum, we can have a kind of as I mentioned, concerted effort or policy that we can implement on the ground, and can be one of the guidance of our policy between the government, as well as between the government and CSO, as well as between the CSO and the CSO. Thank you very much, and happy discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pribadi Sutiono, for your kind welcoming remarks. I would like to also kindly ask you to please not leave our Zoom room just yet, as we are going to continue with our second welcoming remarks, and we will continue with group photo as well afterwards. Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, for the second welcoming remarks, I would like to invite our co-hosts, co-organizers of the CSO Forum, the Secretary General of AMAN, Ibu Ruby Kholifah. Please welcome on your screen Ibu Ruby Kholifah for her welcoming remarks.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. Professor Azyumardi Azra, President of AMAN. Dr. Pribadi Sutiono, the Assistant Deputy for Asia, Pacific and African Affairs. Professor Ruhaini Zuhayatin, the Chief of AMAN Indonesia Board Member. And distinguished guest speakers, moderators, and all friends from 14 countries. So welcome to CSO Forum. This forum is become very special in two ways. Number one is happening in the situation where we are actually isolated from mobilization outside our house. So, but the good thing is we are able to reaching out more and more participants coming from even remote area where perhaps if we do in offline, it is impossible to engage those groups. The other also, the presence of the participant coming from outside sub-regional countries, also indicating that the topic or the theme that we are going to discuss in coming 2 days is actually relevant and very much resonance with what's happening in different continents and also different regions. So as part of sub-regional countries, we're looking at, we're sharing similar challenges after the fall of ISIS. Therefore, the Asian Muslim Action Network feeling it is really important and crucial for all of us to really see and analyze the new situation and come up with more sharp and more operational recommendation, in particularly how to strengthen the cooperation and collaboration within civil society and also between civil society and governments. So this forum, it is maybe for some of you is not new. We also started the CSO Forum in 2018 for the sake of providing input for sub-regional a meeting where government to government meeting happened at that time. And then we started with the building strong foundation, how partnership can be translated into more concrete way. We're dealing a lot with the term of partnership. It's easy to say, but it's not easy to implement. I know the nature of CSO working in Indonesia must have partnership with the government, but looking at other countries where civic space is getting shrinking right now, where civil society is not easy to engage in any decision-making process. So with this, actually, we are also very much appreciated the discussion quite deep 2019 by Deakin University. Pak Greg is here relating with foreign terrorist fighters, again, to look at the best practices of how civil society across sub-regional countries actually responding hand in hand with the government, or civil society alone, or already implementing a series of programs that dealing with returnees, deportees, and ex-combatant and their family. The forum done in Bali, and it was attended by several countries, including Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand. And then we had a very fruitful discussion on that. So this forum is actually to complete the previous forum that CSO done to elaborate more on the perspective of sub-regional, looking at the current situation where ISIS is defeated. Then it is very important and timely to really looking at our domestic policy to the issue of returning of women and children, and also to open new conversation among us, because ISIS has gone, but the people, the supporters, sympathizers, they are still exist in our countries. And what is a new conversation that we would like to see is surrounding the modalities that Southeast Asia, Asia, and maybe beyond what we call multiculturalism axis, how this can be power to actually contribute to the prevention on the new rise of radicalism or extremism in our region. The other important thing is actually how to engage the work of peace building, women, peace, and security to be part of intersecting with when we are discussing about the returnees, women and children, because some of the countries in sub-regional and also where you are here, government has been implementing the National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security. That also needs to be counted when we are implementing the other National Action Plan, in particular relating with PVE. So by having a lot of friends coming from different regions, I am very much hoping that this forum really gain more creative and innovative ways how actually we can together handling the current situation, including to tackle the issue of cross-border, where actually we are neighbor countries, and what happened in Southeast Asia perhaps also happen in other borders situation in different continents. So friends, welcome all of you to CSO Forum, and I am very much looking forward to hearing a lot of stories coming from the ground, from different disciplines, but we are creating the best solution for our country. Thank you so much and enjoy the forum. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Secretary General of AMAN, Ibu Ruby Kholifah. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this is part of the opening ceremony that we are all have been waiting for. After this, we are going to listen to the keynote address from one of the most prolific Islamic studies thinkers, scholars, leaders in Indonesia. He is also a former rector of UIN Syarif Hidayatullah in Jakarta. He is a currently president of AMAN Indonesia as well. He needs no further introduction, actually. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on your screen our keynote address, Professor Azyumardi Azra.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, Mr. Pribadi Sutiono, my long-time friend, colleagues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, actually, before moving to coordinating Minister of Political, Legal, and Security Affairs. First of all, I would like to congratulate Ministry, Coordinating Ministry and AMAN Indonesia for this CSO Forum, which looks to have been very successful, at least represented by 14 countries, participants from 14 countries. So we are very grateful for your presence in this meeting, today's discussion. I would also like to thank AMAN Indonesia on behalf of AMAN International based in Bangkok. We admire Ibu Ruby Kholifah and all her teams at AMAN Indonesia that have continued to conduct a number of programs, beneficial programs for not only for Indonesia but also for region in Southeast Asia or even beyond Southeast Asia. So hopefully this two-day meeting will produce insights in order to respond to latest development related to ISIS, related also to ISIS returnees to many countries. Yeah. I'm not going to give a very long speech because you are going to discuss it, but at least, of course, we all know that ISIS has been losing ground, in many fronts in the Middle East, in Syria or in Iraq or in Kurdish area. But for sure, the decline of ISIS is not the end of extreme and violent ideology of ISIS. It remains. If you look at the latest case in France a few days ago, the case of Samuel Paty that has been slaughtered, a young man named Abdullah, and then actually the family of Abdullah migrated from Moscow to France, and one of his sisters is actually a member of ISIS. He himself was in contact with ISIS, a group in Syria, before he cut the throat of Samuel Paty. So this is the most obvious examples of the continued existence of ISIS everywhere, because actually violent ideology like those ISIS is related to other factors. related to other factors, like for instance, they failed integration of Muslim migrant. Actually, not Muslim migrant or Muslim or people citizen of Muslim origin. Like, because now if you look at Muslims in France or in the UK, for instance, and then actually they are now fourth generation of migrants, but still they are integrated. They failed. They are not integrated in the whole society. They, in the case of France, many of these most of Muslim migrants actually live in slum area outside of Paris. Yeah, that was the situation. Of course, not as bad as in Paris. If you look at Muslim migrants in the UK, in London, even in fact, actually many Muslim achieve important political position, like the mayor of London is a Muslim. But that's not the case in France, for instance, because of the strict laicity, strict secularism of France. Probably the situation is almost the same in Germany, where you can find the enclave of Turkish, German Turkish people, in certain area, in one village in Berlin, for instance. And of course, there are many other Turkish people around the country, around Germany. So this kind of situation, the fail of economic development, the fail of this migrant to integrate in social, cultural, and political life, make it easy for them to adhere to violent ideology of ISIS, for instance. I think that also the case with Indonesia. Probably not, or let's say Singapore, but the case is almost the same with Indonesia and Philippines. Yeah, where in the Philippines, of course, the situation, in the south, Mindanao, for instance, still in turbulent, political turbulence, and also in violence, Abu Sayyaf, etc. That Indonesia, of course, is more stable, but it doesn't mean that we don't have violent people around. Not to say terrorists. Terrorists were around. A few days ago, actually, the special detachment, police detachment of 88, actually detained a number of people in several provinces, in West Sumatra and also in, I cannot recall, probably in Lampung or South Sumatra, but in several, 2 or 3 provinces. So there are still people who strongly believe to the ideal of ISIS. And at the same time, of course, in Indonesia, Indonesia still has still a problem with the ISIS returnees. Actually, silently, Indonesia accepted probably 180 ISIS returnees. I think 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah. Including I met one lady, actually a quite old lady, and with her son in of religious radicalism, conducted by South Korean embassy in Jakarta, and then of course this lady told me the story of her escaping ISIS, and also her son. I think that they are quite integrated by the help of police detachment of 88. But there are some other who fail to integrate in the society, because we have to admit that many agencies and also government ministries fail to have a good coordination among themselves. For instance, we need, to help these returnees with let's say, economic support, for instance. But there is no support from Ministry of Social Welfare. They just ignore this. Actually, for instance, also there should be support from Ministry of Manpower, for instance, Ministry of Labor, but they don't care. So that's the problem. So that's why we are very happy that coordinating Ministry of Political, Legal, and Security Affairs has a special attention to this problem. So I think we need to do, still there is a lot of things we need to do, not only in terms of security, but also in terms of welfare. Security approach is good, but not always be successful, not always can be expected to be very successful to integrate. Yeah. So that's why we need cooperation, not only with CSO. Yeah. This forum, of course, emphasized the need for cooperation with CSO, but not many government ministries are interested, feel convenient to cooperate with CSO. Because I think, actually some ministries, some ministers, some government high official are very suspicious of CSO still. Because sometimes some leaders of CSO are very critical to government policies, for instance. So that's why we are very happy to have coordinating Ministry of Political, Legal, and Security Affairs to cooperate in this matter. Now, in addition to that, we need also to strengthen the counter ideology, counter understanding of violent ideology of ISIS. We need to, for instance, to introduce them with the idea of religious moderation, what we call in Indonesia as wasatiyah Islam, Islam wasatiyah. Of course, we need, in order to be able to spread Islam wasatiyah, we need also cooperation with Islamic mainstream Muslim organization. Like, of course, in Indonesia, we do have a big organization like NU, Nahdlatul Ulama, Muhammadiyah, and many other smaller organizations across the country. They adhere to wasatiyah Islam. What is wasatiyah Islam? Is middle path Islam. Middle path Islam, which is not leaning to the extreme left and to the extreme right, but in the middle, just balance, justice, some characteristic of distinction of this wasatiyah Islam, being tawasud in the middle, being tawazun, meaning in always balance, and also ta'adul, meaning always be fair, and tasamu, always tolerant. These are some characters of the Islam wasatiyah, and we are very fortunate actually to have this moderate Islam, wasatiyah Islam, because if you look at what the violent groups in Indonesia, actually they transnational groups in Indonesia, but not local, homegrown organization like Muhammadiyah or NU. So I think I appeal also that ministry and also AMAN to establish, to strengthen cooperation with organization of Islam wasatiyah, not only in Indonesia but also overseas. Yeah? Of course, we are very fortunate compared to, let's say, with Muslim in France or in England. They have no big, moderate, mainstream wasatiyah organization like we do have in Indonesia. You cannot find. It is very difficult to find wasatiyah organization nationwide with nationwide influence in France or in Germany or in the UK or in Australia for that matter, that can attract the loyalty of Muslim. So that's why actually violent ideology in all countries, not only Indonesia but also in continents like Europe and also in other places, that they are dormant. They are dormant, but they could come to the forefront from time to time if they have some kind of some if something happened like the case of Charlie Hebdo cartoon, for instance. Yeah. So I think again I need to close by congratulating the coordinating ministry for political, legal, and security affairs, and of course AMAN Indonesia for this very successful cooperation. But still, we need to do more than this meeting. After this meeting, in the post meeting. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Professor Azyumardi Azra, with a very strong end note of your keynote address. Still, we need to do more. A lot needs to be done, and we need to do more. Thank you very much, Professor Azyumardi Azra. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Even though this CSO forum is organized online, it is nonetheless a pleasant occasion for us to meet, to network, and as Ibu Ruby mentioned also in her welcoming remark, a wonderful opportunity to engage as many colleagues as possible, regardless of geographical boundaries. And so I guess this is really the time for us to also celebrate this meaning. What I mean is that I would like to invite all of you, please, all of you, kindly open your video. You can turn your mic off, of course. But kindly turn on your video as we are going to have a group photo. Yes, kindly, one of members of organizing team can lead us for group photo. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please kindly open your video for group photo.
Okay, maybe we can take a picture for a few minutes. Please open all of your comments.
Please open all of your video. The organizing team can perhaps cue 1, 2, 3, or to make it clearer for all participants when they can turn on, and also perhaps if they see fit, turn off their video again. Okay. Such a wonderful occasion.
Okay, we have 4 layers for take a picture. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we have finished.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Please kindly continue to open your video so that we can continue interacting with each other so that we don't miss each other, so that it's as if we are meeting person to person. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, upon conclusion of this opening ceremony, we will continue with panel sessions for the next 2 days, and the panel session will be led directly by Ibu Ruby Kholifah with different moderators, of course, for each session. And immediately after this, we are going to have our first panel entitled Reading the Evolution of Violent Extremism in Sub-Regional Countries. And this discussion, or this first session, will be led by our moderator, Ibu Siti Altaf Devianti Ismail. She is the co-founder and managing director of AMAN Research Center, Malaysia. Thank you once again, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention. I would like to wish you a wonderful and fruitful CSO Forum. My apologies for any of my shortcomings. We are closing this wonderful opening ceremony, and I'm handing the screen to Ibu Ruby Kholifah to continue to lead the panel sessions, and also to our first moderator from AMAN Research Center, Malaysia. Sakdiyah Makruf signing out. Have a wonderful CSO Forum. I'll see you at the next forum. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace be upon us all. Goodbye.
Thank you, Shadia, for wonderful launching this morning. So I'm not going to give another speech, but you will have a program book shared by the organizer later on, the detail relating with the program, as well as all the speakers, moderators, and also the participants. I'm just right away go to Altaf. Altaf, the floor is yours.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Assalamualaikum, and a very good morning, and perhaps also a very good evening for our friends who are from the northern, joining us from the northern hemisphere. Thank you very much, AMAN Indonesia, for inviting me and allowing me to be the first moderator for today for a very important forum to discuss on a pertinent issue. It was pertinent before the COVID situation, and today the whole issue on extremism, violent extremism, terrorism has also taken a whole new turn with the rise of COVID and with the challenges that brought forward by it. So for the first plenary, we will the title is Reading the Evolution of Violent Extremism in Sub-Regional Countries. We have 4 distinguished speakers who will be joining us, who will be presenting on this broad topic. I will not go too deeply into their CV, since all of you have also received the booklet that they give a detailed CV of every speaker. These 4 speakers will be lucky, I would say, to basically set the stage for today and tomorrow's session by providing the framework on how we will be discussing further the big title on returning of women and children and new conversations arising. Now, before I go into our first speaker, just let me remind the speakers, while the session is will take between 2 hours, each speaker will have about 15 to 20 minutes of speaking time, after which all speakers have presented. The floor will be open for questions. In the meantime, while the speakers are speaking, participants are free to submit their questions in the chat box which will be consolidated by Neni, if I'm not mistaken, Neni from AMAN Indonesia, and I will be reading them out. However, alternatively, I will also open it a bit, but that will be quite more limited. I would suggest for everyone who have questions to please submit it in writing for the sake of the smoothness of the program as well as timing. Okay, allow me to now present the first speaker for today's session. The first speaker will be talking on the evolution of violent extremism in Southeast Asia. Dr. Nur Huda Ismail, founder of Ruang Ngobrol Indonesia. I don't think he is unknown to anyone. He's rather famous in this region. He was apart from being the founder of Ruang Ngobrol, he's also founder of the Institute for International Peace Building, and was also an ex-journalist and is now currently a fellow at RSIS Singapore. So without further ado, perhaps let me hand over to Dr. Nur Huda for your presentation.
Thank you, Altaf, my good friend, my old friend too. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning for everyone. I'm going to talk very briefly, but I want to share first I'm going to use my PowerPoint here. So I'm going to talk about the evolution of violent extremism. Before doing that, I need to present my positionality. So when I talk about the subject, I have to know my position, how I'm going to relate to this very issue. So I'm a former myself. I studied in an Islamic boarding school and called Al-Mu'min Gruki. Many of those who graduated from that school were involved in political violence in Indonesia. The founder of the school, also the founder of JI. So I have very unique position in this issue. But at the same time, I'm a social entrepreneur. What I mean by social entrepreneur, when I see this issue of the rise of radicalizations, I have to find, as a social entrepreneur, I'm thinking of how can I solve this issue with the three main characteristics of a social entrepreneur, which is simple, duplicable, and self-sustained. That's always obsession when I do when I face this kind of issue. And then therefore I'm a filmmaker. This is my latest film, and I think there will be a premiere this month here in Singapore, but if you are interested to screen this, feel free to contact me. This is a story about the 16-year-old girl called Dania, whom I have been following from Iraq and Syria up to this day, and she's now part of my ongoing initiative of Ruang Ngobrol as one of the content creator. I would dub her as a credible voice, sharing stories to challenge the narrative of the radicals. And today I'm still in school. I mean, I'm a scholar. So after finishing my PhD, and then I'm now doing my fellowship here. To understand the evolution, I think I'm going to use this is the data from the Indonesian police about how the evolution of the network. Because when we talk about violent extremism, as a definition alone, violent extremism is still highly contested and problematic, because we are trying to link between violent and extremism in the same time. Because many people are extremists, but they do not believe it is important to use of violence. But many people involved in violence, they do not have they do not start their activity because of his or her ideology. I always use the case of a number of sources whom I met in Poso, for instance. They don't understand about the theological debate within Islam, whether this is jihad or not jihad, but they were involved in terrorism simply because of revenge. So this is one of another contestation with this definition. So there are like in Indonesia, there are organizations like Hizbut Tahrir has been very extreme in terms of their political call, because they want to change the political landscape in Indonesia from secular into Kholifah, but none of them who are still associated with Hizbut Tahrir advocate of the use of violence. Those splintering from Hizbut Tahrir, yes, some of them involved, but this is always a contestation that we try to link between ideology and action at the same time. But violent extremism now we understood as a political violence, someone who individual who embrace a violent extreme ideology and then end up involved in violence. And this is how the evolution based on the detachment 88 data, all of this terror in region, the whole region here in Southeast Asia, they are all linked at a specific incident of mobilization of individual in Afghanistan. Because in Indonesia, Malaysia, and also Philippines, they have what we call a homegrown Islamic organization trying to challenge their respective country, the secular system. In the case of Indonesia, we have a Darul Islam, but initially their target of operation has been revolved around targeting the government officials, and their skill to attack the government official is relatively very low. Unlike when then after in some of them involved in military training, their skill increased dramatically. So since then up to today, you see the evolution. So then this is the data, how many actually Southeast Asian travel all over the world. I have been compiling this data from so many different sources, from government, newspaper report. So between 1980s, that is the beginning of Afghanistan, until 2020, with some of them in the travel to Syria and then saw them Mindanao, and then some of them go back to Afghanistan again. Indonesia is still the largest here, and also followed by Philippines, and also Singapore, Cambodia, Thailand, also Malaysia. What I'm trying to say here is that when we are talking about the distribution of violent extremism or distribution of foreign fighter, we have to look at also here, it is a regional problem, and they are established link once they are involved or stay together in one place called armed international conflict. And this is the location, the destination. So some of them around 2,000 travel to Afghanistan, and some of them to Syria, and then some of them to Mindanao. This is all the numbers. The question will be, why do the Southeast Asian go? Why? So I try to answer this into three. First, organizational goals. As I said earlier, many of those people who involved in foreign fighting in armed international conflict, they are linked to a specific organization. This is in the past, in the 1980s. So they are part of their program for military training. They want to put into practice their violent ideology, but in the same time also they want to expand their network. If you can see, before they were JI, they were Darul Islam, but after the split they established JI after they met a number of militants also, especially coming from Egypt, from Middle East, and they inspired by that. And then we have to also look at this issue as a geopolitics. What happened in Afghanistan has to do with what happened in the geopolitics, the Cold War. So those Islamists used to be our friend in the sense they are the friend of the West as a way to weaken the communists. So that is how so what I'm trying to say here, you cannot understand the rise of violent extremism without looking the understanding of geopolitical issue as well as history. Another thing also, I saw some of the participants already raised the issue about religious reason. Yes, some of them have a narrow interpretation, as Prof. Azra already mentioned. They have very narrow interpretation of jihad as a personal obligation or fardhu ain. As you know very well, the jihad itself in the Quran, if you look at the Quran, jihad doesn't mean holy war. And in fact, in Islam, we don't see, there is no term of al-harb al-muhaddatha. So there is no term of holy war. Holy war is the term used especially by the West after the crusade, because the Westerner tried to use the same coin by the Christian literature to understand the rise of a revolt coming from Islam. And if you look at in the Quran, the word, if Quran encourage if there is a passage related to war, the Quran will never use the word jihad. Instead, they use qital. But this particular group interpret jihad as a very narrow, which is personal obligation to fight. And this reservoir, it has to do with what I think the existing debate today. Because in the end of the day, terrorism, if we really want to squeeze it into the very basic understanding, will be the contestation between state and religion. In this context, will be Islam. So that type of contestation will be lived Islam. Those who believe, as Professor Azra said, moderation of Islam, Islam who embrace modernity, willing to engage so many different value, and imagine Islam. They imagine Islam that is very stiff, very literalist, and then therefore many of those people, as if they are part of the transnational identity. So Islam is a one single body. So anything happen outside Indonesia, they feel compelled to fight. As again, because they're very narrow interpretation. But also we cannot ignore that many of those people travel to fight not only because of organizations or not because of religious as well, some of them because of individual purposes. In my PhD, I use the term called masculinity. Some of them has been socialized, and then they are imagined that they want to prove themselves as a super cool guy or prove themselves as a true warrior. This is one of them too, because they have been socialized with a very specific notion of being masculine, narrow understanding of being masculine. So they want to prove that one. Another possible reason will be, some of my sources said, because of redemption. They were involved in a number of atrocities or a number of criminals, and they reach a point in their life, my life is so boring, I need to start new life. And then for them, going to fight is the quickest way for them to embrace true Islam. As again, they are part of the image in Islam. And also because of love. A number of my team in Ruang Obrol, Rizka, has been documenting a number of women who were recruited purely, has to do with love. For instance, migrant worker. In my film called The Bride, for instance, I've been following 3 women looking for love in social media, and they were allured to join ISIS. And, like ample of stories revolve around either they are hopelessly romantic woman looking for love, or either they become the victim of love, become the second wife, or they follow their husband who already traveled to Syria. So they are not radical in the sense that they want to commit a violence, but they just driven by the desire to be part of a family. So in this context, I want to say it is very important to understand how the radicals, how ISIS, how a violent extremist group exploit the very notion of social construction of gender, how to be a good man and how to be a good woman. And another issue also economy. Many of the people were allured to join to fight to ISIS because of the promise of money, for instance. This is also about personal gain. So even though the name itself, if we look at the definition by UN, they come up with a very narrow definition called FTF, foreign terrorist fighters. But we know for a fact on the ground, not all of them want to fight. There are many of them are in fact the victim of recruitment. And I'm going to talk about this guy. For instance, this is Indonesian who are now in Afghanistan after failing travel to Syria. Failed travel to Syria, and then because of the contact with social media, he traveled there because part of as again, you see the Caliphate project will always very, flexible, moving from one area to the other. Going back to my argument about imagine Islam. There are specific of Islam that are not lived. They are not part of our everyday life. But basically, the result what we are seeing now is how Muslim deal with modernity, because moderate and also fundamentalist or moderate or Puritan, it's also product of modernity. The moderate always want to embrace, accept, and modify, and the radicals group, the Puritan one, always want to to come up with a regressive understanding of Islam, going back to the golden age. They want to fight, they want to dominate. So therefore, the Caliphate project will always be there. And then, as again, I want to give you an example here. I interviewed maybe many of you already interviewed someone, a Malaysian guy called Nasir Abbas. He fought in Afghanistan, and then for him, his time in Afghanistan is like he sees his time in Afghanistan as a true warrior of Islam. As again, he never see his fighting as a part of terrorists. He see themselves as he defend the right. So those who fight, it's completely wrong to see those who are involved in for being forever driven by what I would call it a cruel motive. They're always driven by positive desire to defend either the oppressed woman, the oppressed brothers. So, in fact, they are not idealistic individuals. They are in fact they want to help others. And this is another quote from Yusuf Adirima, whom I interviewed. He fought in Mindanao, Indonesian who fought in Mindanao. He said, I was fighting for 2 years in the conflict area in Mindanao. I carried AK-47 every day. It was like my second wife. I never regret my jihad in Mindanao because Muslims were oppressed and it was in the Medan, so jihad fit. But I don't think Indonesia is no Medan jihad. There is no conflict here. What I'm trying to say here is, yes, some of them fighting, but none of them, not all being a foreign fighter. When they come back, they want to be terrorists. No, there are process of why foreign fighter become a terrorist. And there are at least 3 process. One of them, what I call it, enlistment. They are being enlisted by his friend. And second process, because of socialization, they socialize among themselves. And lastly, because they're disenchanted. So again, when we understand this, we need to understand the complexity of people getting in, stay, and also leaving. And we shouldn't assume that those only men who are attracted to the violent here. For instance, I did my field work in Marawi. Maybe my friend from southern Philippines can share a lot. I interviewed almost 30 foreign fighters there. I mean, arrested one. They are willingly to talk. And some of them are this woman. There's a fascinating story about how the Maute group used women specifically to spread the rumor. So basically she will be in the market running around and telling the neighborhood, oh, the Muslim being killed by the Christian and then the Muslims. And so when they create a lot of rumors, so what I'm trying to say, there are different rule of women. And as clearly here, we have an issue of the deportees also, unintegrated deportees, failed to go to Mindanao to join the Kholifah project in Syria. And then they went through what they call it de-radicalization initiative by a social minister. I interviewed those who handle her, and they said, oh, they're very nice. I cannot really detect whether this couple will go back to violence, but end up they become the suicide bomber in Holo. And this is true. And this is again, as I think in the beginning, from the minister already acknowledged what we are now, women, a part of the number of Indonesians who are now in Syria. As again, my argument is, how about the woman? As a man, some of them are driven by masculinity, some of them driven by the desire to, the desire to defend. But how about the woman? So I argue that the woman here is because, as again, they are attracted to completely different narrative. Like the guy, this is one of the story. You can visit my community website, our community website called Ruang Obrol. You can see the story of Aulia. Aulia is a woman here. After I appeared at one of national TV, and then she contacted her family and then in Indonesia and said, okay, asking my contact. She contacted me, and then we in contact. And then many of them here, like for instance, Shamina, this is a woman. So we see this is a woman. And she become my soul, one of my source to understand what is really going on in the camp. And one of my team, Rizka, has been in contact with her almost every day. So she always shared what is going on, how many people even now suffer with COVID, how is it. So, and she wrote a story, her story in Ruang Obrol. From the story, we can demonstrate the role of politic of piety. How specific work movement and women always obsessed with notion of piety. They use the body, because I follow this term from Sabah Mahmud, one of the feminist writers, her study looking at how the woman movement in Egypt. But I think her framework can be used to understand how women are obsessed with the fashion, with the fashion first. Like if Dania, if you look at my film Dania, for instance, the first reason why she joined, yes, she was lonely and searching for specific attention from her parent, but the first attention that attract her most will be fashion. She saw the film, oh my God, this girl, this woman wearing such a beautiful hijab, very full cover, unlike me not. So, and then she went to start searching information to the internet, then stuck in the rabbit hole of radicalizations. So we tend to look at those people joining, become a network of violent extremism purely ideology is wrong. Yes, they use ideology, but only some of them, but not all of them. So therefore, I use these people as a credible voice to challenge the narrative. And more importantly, according to Aulia and my sources in the camp, almost 100% women incident in the camp. This boiled to our contestation here. Maybe perhaps because of the victim of these people are normal individual, and then they are part of a specific way of looking at their religions. So maybe we need to shift the narrative. Not only this issue of radicalization will become the threat for the state security, but also human security, because this ideology cripple individual, free spirit, celebrating the difference again, of how to be a good human being. And then we cannot ignore the fact that most of the people now, with the presence of social media, has changed the landscape of recruitment. This is number of chat that we have been doing, we have been trying to understand. And therefore, in Ruang Obrol now, we work closely with Facebook. We call it redirecting. So any individual in Indonesia who types specific word, that we collected a number of words, let's say jihad or specific word that being used, they will be redirecting to our website. And in that website, they can engage with our credible voice. We have Prof. Azra already mentioned, we have a written fighter. He's not part of Ruang Obrol, former reform terrorist, and then so that they can relate. Because my argument here is that people tend to ignore, people tend to deny all informations if we give them logic. But if we give them emotional attachment, and especially coming from credible voice, hopefully these people will revisit their own understanding. I hope, I know that we always worry the question that we being posed, especially in Indonesia and the civil society, always do we need to bring back or not? This always revolves around this very question. But I pose a bit different question. Do we want to have identified Indonesian or Malaysian or not? Because we might lose the chance to identify them. By identify them, hopefully we can understand how, not only why. Because if we focus on why, they will come up with a lot of ideological justification. But if we ask how, then we can understand myriad of ways people get involved in this very peculiar and dangerous ideology. Thank you very much. I hope this short talk and spark conversation this morning. Thank you, Altaf.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nur Huda. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. Your summary of the evolution of violent extremism is really important, I think. Looking at how different waves of jihadists are different from each other, starting from way back, even with the Afghan war, the complexities of what allows them to join, and in particular the role of women, the evolution of the role of women. And I think this will be explored further by our fourth speaker later. But like you've just mentioned just now, there's two things that you need to look into: why and how. So the why and how will help us to come up with ways or to develop ways on how to address the situation in reintegration or in providing alternative narratives and so forth. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce the second speaker, which will look at the new phases of peace building in Mindanao, Mr. Carlito Kaloy Manluping, the president of Bali Mindanao Foundation Incorporated, an international center for peace of the Philippines. He's a rural development worker and peace builder with more than 3 decades of experience working with both government and non-government organizations, and has a wide range of knowledge and skills across peace building and conflict transformation. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Mr. Charito.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for inviting me. I have been asked to talk about the new phase of peace building in Mindanao. So let me start with the context, Mindanao. So Mindanao, of course, I think most if not all of us know this, just to have a context, 1/3 of the total Philippine land area is in Mindanao. So 1 out of every 3 hectares of Philippine land is in Mindanao. 1/4 of total Philippine population is in Mindanao or from Mindanao. So 1 out of every 4 Filipino is a Mindanaoan. 14 out of the 20 poorest provinces in the Philippines are in Mindanao. So it is the richest region in terms of natural resources, especially agriculture and mining. But it is also the poorest. Its people are the poorest. Mindanao is also the center of 2 long-running armed conflicts. One, the Communist Revolution, which has been going on for more than half a century. This armed conflict has killed thousands of Filipinos. And there were several attempts to find a negotiated solution, but all the attempts at peace processes have all ended in failure. Second, the Muslim struggle for self-determination. Despite the peace agreements reached between the government and the Moro National Liberation Front and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, armed conflicts persist with the rise of new armed groups like the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters. The Marawi siege and the current state of the Maranao Muslims reminds us that this is the starkest reminder, very clear reminder of what violent extremism could do. The city is still in shambles. Most IDPs or internally displaced persons, they still remain in transition camps, so near yet so far from their devastated homes in Marawi, with children and women suffering the most. More than 3 years after the siege, the government forces are still waging seemingly endless battle against the remnants of the terrorists they fought in Marawi 3 years ago. Thanks. The Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. The Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front peace agreement and the resulting Bangsamoro Organic Law that created the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region has brought about a significant de-escalation in the violent armed conflict. The MILF is now at the helm of the new Bangsamoro government, and it has recently taken into itself the difficult task of rehabilitating Marawi, where the national government has apparently failed after more than 3 years. The threat of violent extremism continues and even intensifies. Recruitment continues, and at least one faction of the BIFF is ISIS-inspired or has pledged allegiance to ISIS. Now, let me just share with you the basis of our peace building work. No, when of Balay Mindanao. No? We are a small peace building NGO with community-based peace building teams all over Mindanao, and 2 teams or 3 teams no, are in the Bangsamoro region. Okay, let me share our conceptual framework. We believe that the absence of lasting peace or the continuing presence of violent conflicts is deeply rooted in political, economic, and sociocultural inequities and historical injustice. That has led to massive poverty and underdevelopment, thus making it impossible to attain lasting peace. Thus, peace-building work requires that we address all the aspects, political, economic, sociocultural, and other forms of structural violence. Now, let me share with you some initiatives of, or some peace-building initiatives to address particularly violent extremism. With the Asia Foundation, we have this project called Communities of Inclusion and Resilience through Collaborative Local Engagements, or Project Circle. This project seeks to reduce vulnerabilities of communities at risk or at-risk communities through local government-led preventing violent extremism interventions. The theory of this project is that if LGUs, in collaboration with other stakeholders, will take the lead and have the right tools and capacities to implement community-level preventing violent extremism interventions effectively, then said LGUs will be better able to reduce violent extremism threats in their communities. Then we have also at least 2, we have 2 projects ongoing which actually seek to reintegrate the various violent extremist groups. In Basilan, we have an ongoing program that works with the local government in helping to reintegrate the former Abu Sayyaf group or ASG combatants. And in Lanao del Sur, we have a reintegration program. We're helping the Lanao del Sur local government and the Marawi city government to help in the reintegration of the ISIS Maute groups or members who have since then returned to the fold of law. So these are basically what we're doing, our community-based work, facilitating stakeholders' participation in ensuring that the communities, the local government units, collectively understand the roots of this conflict and addressing the threats to their communities. Okay. And next, I just want to talk briefly about this the COVID factor. The Philippines is poised to plunge into its deepest slump. The scale of contraction would be the largest on record, beating the previous low under the Marcos dictatorship. In other words, this is the deepest economic problem that the Philippines is facing, and Mindanao, being the poorest region, will bear the brunt of this crisis. And this pandemic has also made community activities, in-person activities, very difficult to organize. And thus, if we talk about the new form of building or peace building, no? Of building empowered, sustainable, resilient, and peaceful communities, the challenge today is not just how to keep the communities and the peace practitioners, the field peace builders safe from security threats. Now, we have to face the threat of being infected by the virus. And or if we organize something that would bring people together, the threat, no, of the community being infected by the virus. Thus, peace building today requires the ability to avoid these threats to health and to life. No? So before it was just a threat to life. Now it's also threat to health, and maybe a dire consequence would be also the threat to life. No? And thus, peace builders today in Mindanao are expected or are required to be more creative, be more innovative. And in our case, we have decided as one of our key policy to optimize virtual, like what we're doing now, and minimize actual. We just have to be creative in ensuring that we continue our work for empowerment toward sustainable, resilient, and peaceful communities, even with these challenges that we're facing now. So that's all. Thank you very much. And I would be happy to interact with you during the open forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was indeed an insightful presentation. I mean, when we do look about violent extremism, in particular reasons for terrorists joining terrorist groups, the one thing that doesn't seem to slip away is that a lot of reasons are also deeply rooted in economic and political inequalities, and in a lot of cases also is historical injustices. But the challenge is, how do you address this? And one of the things I've noticed in your presentation that was very interesting was that while dealing with the fallout of violent extremism, key thing that you need to strengthen is community resilience against violent extremism, and how good governance and community action is extremely important. And to top of that, when you brought in COVID-19, the challenges that this whole pandemic has brought on, in particular to underdeveloped countries, in addressing this, is it's actually rather overwhelming. And to bring it then forward as well is that a lot of the challenge of online extremism as a result of COVID-19, of whether COVID-19 has escalated online extremism, is a question for us all. And this brings us to our third speaker, who will be talking on online extremism in the time of COVID-19. Professor Daniel Muhammad Yusuf, Associate Professor with the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization from my home country, Malaysia, who will be speaking on this exact issue. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Professor Daniel.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson, Sister Ataf. I hope you can hear me. Everything is fine, yeah?
Yes, you're good. You're good.
Okay,
you're very clear.
thank you very much. Okay, I've been basically requested to speak on online extremism, more or less in the context, of course, of COVID-19. Just as a preamble to my, I think, discussion, I hope I won't take long. I think I'll use up maybe less of the 15 minutes. If you look at the phenomenon of online extremism, we can see that it's been known. We've been aware of it over the past, I think, 2.5 decades or so. Just as a kind of reference, a quote from a former Attorney General of the Department of Justice of the United States of America. She said, Online violent ideologies can rapidly proliferate and spread, and threats can leap borders and oceans in an instant. No nation can exist in a bubble of isolation. No country can imagine themselves immune from world events. And the security of each state increasingly depends on the security of all states. You can think of the entire internet as a place where ideas embodied in cyberspace are having a war. And it's not much different than the war of gods in heaven, which has been taking place since there's been human beings. And I think we can see this being precisely, I think, the context of online extremism today. If you look even at the, I think, latest edition of extremism in Europe, for example, from Dresden to a number of cities in France and, of course, in Austria as well. This seems to be the scenario as well. It's gone increasingly transnational. It's going across boundaries. And this is what we have to be aware of when we talk about extremism online. I'll get to more of the details in relation to Malaysia as we go along. So as for this presentation, I'll be looking at terrorist use of online space and the challenges of digital communication, especially to the state. Yeah. I've always referred to the online space as a kind of neo-Westphalian construct. Yeah, initially, there was a kind of, I think, positivity about cyberspace. Yeah. But I think over the years, states included have sought to seek a kind of securitization of this particular platform. And we see various initiatives being taken by, I think, different countries and even regional organizations in relation to especially data infrastructure. I'll get to a bit of that later. I'll also be looking at perhaps a short discussion on how online extremism affected Malaysian extremism itself. And we'll also have a bit of a say on the post-caliphate as well as online extremism during COVID-19. And then I'll conclude. So if you look at the challenges of digital communication and terrorist use of the internet, we can see that it's gone on leaps and bounds during Web 2.0. Yeah? So we have the social media component that often been cited today in relation to transnational communities and organization. It's a kind of techno utopia, but there is a downside to technology, as we know. Cybercrime, of course, violent extremism and terrorism, including authoritarian or despotic regimes. Apart from, of course, extremism and radicalism, we also become aware of how these movements, these ideas can now be organized, and they can also, of course, go and recruit followers in relation to them. Not all of it is necessarily bad, but some of it can be problematic if you look at the use of social media in democratization, people power movement, the failure of the Arab winter, for example. So when we look at digital communication, we have the usage in forming national and transnational communities, linkages between groups, organizing offline action, and even, of course, unfortunately, facilitating violent radicalization. Public elements of global digital communication network in Web 2.0 has meant that we are increasingly speaking about walled gardens. So that's why we have a great degree of difficulty in terms of dismantling certain security aspects of platforms like Telegram and so on. This is, of course, again, not new. If you look at even Web 1.0, we already had examples of the radical right as the pioneer users of online space. For example, Stormfront, the English Defence League, and Britain First. So these were among the first, I think, pioneers of using online space for disseminating extremist ideology. So in Web 2.0, these are the current challenges that we see in relation to extremism and radicalism. We see the proliferation of radical extremist narratives and content. We see the development of closed and self-reinforcing echo chambers. Yeah? When you get into groups on social media, there tends to be, I think, a decrease of pluralism in terms of discussion, in terms of ideas. There's also the possibility of accelerated radicalization because of the mass of content that is available online, and also the possibility of autodidactic and remote radicalization. In this case, what it means is that you can self-radicalization without the involvement of any particular individual or organizations. So we had a number of examples in relation to this. I think the most famous example of it had been Anders Breivik. Yeah. So autodidactic radicalization, self-radicalization, of course, it works both ways. It can be a force of good as well. We also heard of the individual in Scotland who became a Muslim all on his own accord. Yeah? So he looked at literature on Islam and so on and became a Muslim through references and material on the internet. So now we have this Web 2.0 and cumulative extremism and the 24-hour communication cycle. So we have competing extremisms, which can easily spiral into revenge acts and so on. So we had, of course, the example of New Zealand and how it led to Sri Lanka and so on. So we have in social media 2.0, a platform where mainstreaming hate is possible. Yeah, we have media framing, we have perceptions of causation, responsibility and response, the democracy of social media as well as negative messaging. And this has led to the state trying to impose some sort of control. And of course, now we have the area in which, of course, governments and CSOs as well as technology multinationals are trying to work around various regulations and laws to facilitate security as well as resilience in society from the threat of extremism. So this is what I was alluding to earlier, the digital space and digital sovereignty. We've seen various attempts by, I think, governments as well as regional organizations to try and, I think, control their interests as a result of the threat of cybersecurity. So we see the weaponization of social media as well as malicious actors, fake democracy, which had been, I think, so prevalent during the Trump administration, shaping beliefs and distorting of facts. So there is the belief now among especially states that there's local, foreign, as well as now digital context of sovereignty that we need to take care of. So the state needs control, and there has to be limitations in moderating and regulating. So we all know about China, but perhaps some of us are, I think, less in the know about certain initiatives like Gaia X by the European Union. Of course, it's mainly to facilitate, I think, data security for their own multinational as well as industries, yeah, from the threat of I think the stealing of information across other platforms. So there's this degree of digital sovereignty that is now being imposed by states. So the internet was initially seen as open and connected post-Westphalian construct, but the state has now pushed back. Yeah? So we're now going back into a kind of, I think, realization that even the digital space needs some sort of regulation. Even Malaysia was embroiled in controversy a number of months ago, yeah, about whether individual citizens had to have license to publish social media video content. So this was, I think, quickly, I think, pushed aside as a non-issue. But nevertheless, it does bring to mind some of the complexity that's involved in relation to regulation as well as, I think, personal liberties as well. TikTok was implicated as well in relation to censorship in regards to the Hong Kong riots as well as, I think, representations of Xinjiang and the Uyghur population. So this intersection between, I think, regime type, social media content, privacy, consumption, and international politics, this nexus between, I think, national security and social media is something that we are, I think, still trying to find the right kind of balance. Especially if you look at certain issues, the Uyghur or Xinjiang issue, whether it's separatist, whether it's about terrorism, the user is lost in a sea of synthetic content. So it reinforces a sense of, I think, mistrust and injustice. I think if you ask the normal person, the lay person, he would be quite lost in relation to giving a verdict about what's actually happening in relation to these kind of cases. Yeah. Let's just have a brief look at Malaysia. If you look at Malaysia, our emphasis on cybersecurity is more in relation to e-governance and the digital economy. By 2020, the digital economy will contribute to about 20% of the GDP, and 40% of business transactions will already be online, I think, by the end of this year. As far as cybersecurity is concerned, we have, I think, a multi-approach of agencies, whether it's Cybersecurity of Malaysia, Mampu on e-governance, the MCMC, as well as the National Cybersecurity Agency under the National Security Council, which looks into a secure cyberspace as well as a trusted digital environment. So this is part of the, I think, ecosystem, which of course takes into consideration CVE as well as CT. Yeah. So if you look at the 12th Malaysia plan, although it's not out yet, the drafts that I have seen does emphasize on security and public safety trust, with PCVE and CT clearly mentioned, I think, in the wording. Yeah. We also have Malaysia Cybersecurity Policy, which was launched last month from 2020 until 2024. It mentions countering violent extremism and counter-terrorism under effective governance and management strategic pillar, with organizations such as Siasat under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as the Royal Malaysian Police, aligned with the National Security Council to look into violent extremism online, as well as its possible use by terrorists in terms of monitoring. So we have the ecosystem, so to say. Yeah. So this will be in implementation from this year until 2024. As far as the recruitment, in terms of violent extremism and the Malaysian numbers, the number that I have with me is that out of the arrests that were made up until the end of August in 2019, there's been about 519 with 175 convictions, and all of these cases involve the internet as an enabler. Yeah, all of them. And apart from that, 266 social media accounts were also taken down. So whether it's from pre-radicalization, exposure to materials, up until actualization, the act of carrying out, I think, a terror act attempt, it all involves the internet as an enabler. So we see the prominence of the internet in all of the Malaysian cases. And of course, this is how they use to expose vulnerable people to radicalization as well as recruitment. Even in the post-ISIS situation, the post-caliphate, the post-physical caliphate, there continues to be, of course, cases of radicalization. We even had a number of cases of radicalization happening online, but also on campus. And of course, using platforms such as Telegram. Of course, not just in Malaysia, but also in Indonesia, I think, at the end of last year. So the trend continues to be the case, as with regards to the French, as well as European context as well. The Vienna attack was also, of course, an act which was certified by the Islamic State. So I'll skip this, I think. Okay, these are, I think, examples of how Malaysians are influenced by extremism, and how the online, I think, context applies, whether it's Telegram or whether it's Facebook, YouTube, and even Skype. If you look at counter-recruitment efforts in relation to terrorist use of the internet, we do have content creation and counter narratives online. So we have a number, I think, of initiatives, whether it's by Siasat or by MCMC. Siasat always has, I think, a series of hackathons that it engages with the youth in relation to producing narratives against violent extremism. MCMC has its or had its, I think, program of Click Wisely in relation to the use responsibly using the internet. And of course, this is not limited to these organizations. We have, I think, more traditional organizations also using the platform. Also, I can add here that my institute, ISTAC, together with the Malaysia Press Institute, Siasat, as well as USM, is going to, inshallah, launch a portal on CVE and peace studies by, I think, the first quarter of next year. So this is something that we look forward to, and I think in the context of terrorist use of the internet, the portal, I think, can be playing an important role in terms of educating, in terms of training, as well as a reference point for scholars and other stakeholders in relation to violent extremism as well as terrorism. Now, if you look at the post-caliphate, the post-physical caliphate, as well as online extremism during COVID-19 is basically the same, but it's without the home address. This is what's been said by IS or the Islamic State towards the end of the physical caliphate. They can widen the reach, connect with far-flung militant groups, as well as exhaust enemies with a war of attrition. So the brand of global jihad is something which is unfortunately here to stay, the exploitation of it or misappropriation of it. So throughout, I think, from the middle of last year until the end of it, we can see that IS was, I think, very active online, congratulating allegiance of various groups as well as their attempts or attacks in different countries, from Sri Lanka to the Congo to Saudi Arabia, the Philippines as well as Libya. So now we have a situation where the plan of attack is developed and conceived abroad or online, but perhaps local radicals are recruited for implementation. So this is, I think, the fear that we have in relation to the post-physical caliphate as well as far-right extremism. So let's not limit this to the experience of Islamic extremism. So in terms of the online scenario, we have the possibility of there being sustainability without with the expensive online presence and materials, of course. The territorial loss of the caliphate is just a fulfillment of prophecies and a test of one's belief. So that's the narrative that's going on in relation to the loss of the physical caliphate. And of course, ISIS exists as an international or transnational organization with a decentered sense of provinces. So this is the post-caliphate reality and how it relates to online extremism. And of course, we have, I think, unfortunately, the cult of martyrdom, which came into prominence in Indonesia last year. As far as COVID-19 was concerned, you see them again trying to latch on to any potential trigger. They were even, I think, commenting on Black Lives Matter controversy in Europe, as well as decolonization around the world as well. So we are all brothers regardless of race. Nobody cares if you are white or black, brown or green, Muslim. We are Islamic State. Hashtag George Floyd and so on. And if you look beyond the global or regional context, you can also look at national context, because I think national politics, in terms of political extremism and other drivers, whether it's ethnicity or race, this can also contribute to, I think, extremism as well, in terms of sentiment against, for example, migrant working population. So we had this happening in Malaysia a number of months back in relation to Gardenia, the bread manufacturer. And we also, of course, have the Islamic State's continuous propaganda on divine retribution in relation to reinforcing anti-China as well as anti-Shiite sentiments. And of course, we had at present or in the past number of weeks, the situation in Europe, where of course IS had acknowledged that the perpetrator in the Vienna case is a member of their organization. So I think by way of conclusion, what can we do for online radicalization and recruitment? In terms of CVE, we should continue developing tools and simulations to help with targeted segmentation for those at risks, those who have certain vulnerabilities. For example, the youth. So we can do research on effective narratives on use as well as social media usage of youth. This is something that we are doing, and the research output should be ready by, I think, the first few months of next year. I think we'll be quite happy to share our research on effective narratives on youth in Malaysia as well as Malaysian social media usage with all of you, I think, next year. I think we can organize something, perhaps together, or ISTAC can organize something and invite all of you. Of course, in relation to the cases after the post-physical caliphate, the emphasis is, of course, on non-security intervention. So we treated those two cases of radicalization on campus as off-ramp cases. And we also perhaps see the need to look into not just a national plan of action, but also something that cascades down to university campuses as well as school compounds. As far as PVE as well as education for prevention and countering violent extremism, we still have a number of programs that we intend to finish hopefully by this year, or at least continue into next year, in terms of our engagement with the youth, including the use of online. And of course, what I mentioned earlier, the launching of the national portal on counterterrorism, CVE, as well as peace building, together by ISTAC, Siasat, Malaysia Press Institute, and a number of other organizations. So I think this is it from me in relation to just introducing, in a sense, the context of online extremism for our discussion for this panel as well as for future sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that presentation. I mean, the challenge of governance in the digital space, I think, is everywhere. You have one hand national security and the other hand the right for freedom of speech and expression. And how do you find middle ground when it comes to cybersecurity? And also, interestingly, a lot of cybersecurity, a lot more emphasis seems to be given on e-governance and the economy. But in our part of the world, there's still a lack of discussion on the more towards the PVE or the CVE area, and how it's hijacked basically by extremist groups, which, as you was rightly mentioned, not only terrorist groups, but far-right groups. So you're looking at not only violent extremism from terrorism, but violence even from hateful extremism, and so forth. And it'll be interesting to discuss further after later on how do we then deal with community resilience online. So talking about community, of course, one of the most important stakeholders in community is women. So with our fourth speaker, we'll be looking at the new phase of women's engagement in extremism. And we have today Ms. Amalina Abdul Nasir, research analyst at the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Singapore. So without further delay, I pass this over to you, Ms. Amalina. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much, Altaf. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are clear.
All right, perfect. Let me just share my screen. Okay, I think it's there.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today, especially to AMAN for inviting me back again this year. Very honored to be on a panel of really esteemed speakers, and I only hope to build the momentum that was set by the preceding speakers and the amazing coverage that we have on this panel. So for my part, at this moment, I'll be touching on the new phase of women's engagement in extremism, largely on a sub-regional perspective. So here's a quick outline of what I'll be covering today. I'll divide my section into 3 parts. Firstly, we'll do a quick environmental scanning, looking at women's engagement in violent extremism in Southeast Asia, how the landscape has shifted, where we are at today with women's involvement and engagement. And then we'll trickle down to looking at the landscape after the fall of Bagos. So I think this is very much building on to what Dr. Daniel just mentioned earlier. Essentially, what are the trends that we are seeing today, but pertaining and specifically to women? And last but not least, moving forward, seeing the trends that we are having today, how do we then move forward? What can governments do? What can CSOs do to mitigate the acceleration or the rise of female militancy in Southeast Asia? So, all right. So just a quick disclaimer, when I speak about sub-regional perspective, at least at the context of my presentation here today, I'll be touching mostly on the aspect of Philippines, Indonesia, as well as Malaysia. Not so much in Singapore, since we're not seeing the trends permeating to Singapore borders, at least as of now. So overall in Southeast Asia, when we talk about women's engagement in violent extremism, we have seen shifts and a gradual trajectory towards larger female participation in this region. And the state or the progress of female participation today, we can argue, is marked by 2 significant points of shift. And that we can trace back to 2 distinct points. And that is firstly the shift from the Jamaah Islamiyah or JI's prominence in this region to that of IS today. And secondly, impacted rather largely by a recent event, and that is the Surabaya church bombing, church attacks. So when we talk about the days of JI, we understand that women participation are primarily envisioned within the domestic roles, and so to speak, those restricted within the private sphere. So that naturally shouldering the responsibilities of being daughters, wives, as well as mothers. And to a small extent, we have seen women permeating into the public spheres, that of being propagandists or spreading the group ideology and engaging in to some extent recruitment efforts. But it's very clear during that time that during the GI days, women are prohibited to participate in violent jihad. But even so, when we talk about women's role being rather restricted in the public sphere, there are certain women that bear certain exceptions, and that is because of their position in terror networks that allows them to leverage on their resources and capacities to contribute and make things possible for those terror networks. And in particular, I would touch on Farhana Mauti, for example. She's an astute business owner. She has a lot of properties and investments, which allowed her to then fund and provide a lot of logistical support to the Mauti group. And also, wife of Bahrunaim, Rafika Hanum, she has orchestrated a series of attacks back in 2015 and 2016. So what we can say is the greater participation of women from the time of GI and slowly permeating into that of the Islamic State today in terror organization came in tandem with the proliferation of technology. When more people are using technology and it is becoming a distinct feature in the face of IS today. And if you can distill down, amongst the many effects that I'll be touching on is 3 effects on how technology has able to facilitate the role of women. Firstly, we're seeing more women shouldering roles in the cyberspace, roles that they cannot initially shoulder within the offline space. They are able to create social media accounts. They are able to impersonate themselves to become men, hence allowing them to participate actively in the pursuit of terror organization. And as a result, it disrupts the social hierarchy and lead and shapes towards a more egalitarian sort of community within the extremist community. Secondly, how technology has able to link women within Southeast Asia to that of women in the Central Caliphate. And this is important because women there then share stories about their life in the Central Caliphate in Syria, what they do, and which has indirectly motivates women here as well as families to make their hijrah to Syria, and hence why we are seeing women until today romanticizing the notion of jihad. And last but not least is the platform to encourage women to women by exchanging stories and asking each other to rally their husband and son to support the cause of the terrorist organization. So in broad strokes, we can categorize the role of women into these categories, as you can see here. That of the naturally wives, daughters, nurturers within the family unit. And then we can also see that women have shouldered the role of online recruiters, definitely supporters, and we have seen women being providing monetary support as well as logistical support, definitely as sympathizers, propagandists as well. And what we are increasingly seeing today, the rise of female militancy and that of attackers from terrorist organizations. So that then brings us to the second shift of women's engagement in violent extremism, and that of from the Surabaya church bombings, which really shook and sent a lot of shockwaves across the region, is the first single unit family-based attack, which included children and women, essentially minorities. And I think we know that that evening as well, there was a premature bomb that had killed another family, and the morning after, another family detonated themselves in front of police headquarters in Indonesia as well. What trickled afterwards was really interesting because maybe purely of coincidence, we are seeing a rise of female militancy. We're seeing that those kind of footprints in permeating to Philippines and Indonesia. So here are some of the events in chronological order. Right after the Surabaya church bombing attacks, we saw a 51-year-old housewife in Malaysia attempting to had planned attack to ram vehicle to the voting polling stations back in 2018. Thereafter, we saw the Hulu church attacks, and then towards the tail end of the year, we saw the stabbing of the security minister of Indonesia, Minister Wiranto, by a couple. The tactic was rather novel, using knife-wielding techniques as well as scissors. So you can see that involved Fitri Adriana, 21 years old. Herself and her husband was linked to Jad, and very much recently the perpetrators of the Holo twin bombings, which was both women as well, the wife of the widow of Norman Luska as well as the wife of Abu Talha, both linked to the Abu Sayyaf group. So essentially what we are seeing today, and this is where we are at in this juncture, at this present day, we are seeing more women at the front lines, so to speak, no longer restricted to the private sphere, but have shouldered almost equal role as men in terror networks. So then after the fall of Bagos, what we are seeing after the fall of Bagos today, after the fall of the IS last stronghold, there appears to be a new wave of narrative from IS female supporters. It has become more prominent that radical women in this region are becoming increasingly unreceptive to the traditional rendition of their roles. So that said, we are seeing in Facebook and Telegram online indications that women are expressing bolder views and venting their frustrations and desire to be given equal opportunity and level of participation as their male counterparts. And specifically, women from this region, we are seeing them exhibiting frustrations of being sidelined, of being marginalized, and voicing strong desire to be more involved and to be more useful in the cause of the Islamic State. And these are our supporters who are coming together with like-minded individuals online to vent their unhappiness of not being allowed to take combat roles. So some of the snippets that we have seen are things that I managed to put on the slide here, which reflects the significant desire to participate when they start to manifest their desire into posts like women should be allowed to spill blood in the cause of IS, essentially wanting to take up arms and wage jihad alongside men. But interestingly, that was something that we saw right after the fall of Bagos. What we are seeing, what is happening today in the cyberspace, groups and chatters no longer stay that long for us to monitor. And so it's getting increasingly tricky and difficult to ascertain if there are still women-specific or gendered-specific narrative, or if they are still there, or if they are as vehement as they are before. So given that's the landscape, given that we are seeing the trajectory of moving forward upwards in terms of female participation, that leads to the question of how can we respond to this? When we talk about PCBE, it's not, So with the increase in appeal, increase in motivation, increase in capacities, what we need today is more female participation in all levels of intervention in our PCBE efforts. From the strategic level, in terms of decision-making, to developing and executing policies, all the way down to conceptualizing deterrence and countering violent extremism programs, as well as execution. And I think there's a strong need to stress that when we talk about female participation, it's not the mere representation, which has been the case for a lot of government agencies in this region. But what we need is, and that is a result of the inaccurate manifestation of gender mainstreaming. When we talk about female participation, it's mere representation. But what we want is actually having a voice and to exercise those kind of participation in those areas. And it's very important to have female participation because the appeal and motivation by women is very much different from men. And so one of the significant, or I would say some notable progress that we have seen over the years, and that is from Malaysia, which made a really commendable move by appointing its first female city chief just recently, early this year. And that's something that we hope might permeate and influence other government agencies as well. But even so, such appointments should be complemented with more female specialists at the forefront of PCBE content and programs. But when we talk about PCBE, it's not just about the people, it's not just about having women present, but also the message and the content. And with that, so far we have seen that we have the correct messenger now. We have corrected that. Previously, we are seeing a lot of, say, male representation, male at the forefront, and male clerics. We are seeing more female clerics participating within the realm of counter-narrative and counter-messaging. But what needs more work is the message itself. And so when extremist organizations putting forward narratives specifically appealing to women, we cannot merely counter it as a form of gender-neutral response, but what we need is more female-centric narratives. And lastly, to complement, not just in terms of strategic level representation, not just in terms of counter-messaging, but also to appreciate what is being done on both sides of the spectrum. And to complement this is the steady flow of resources and funding to civil society organization and bottom-up initiatives. As we know, in combating terrorism, it's not just a lot of bottom-up, top-down approaches from the government down to the masses, but what also matters is the bottom-up approach. And we need these two actions from both ends to make progress in addressing the issue of extremism. We have a lot of ground-up initiatives, especially in countries like Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia. But in order to maximize the reach, the efficacy, and especially the potential, we need government to also remain committed or start being committed to fund and provide resources to CSOs so that they can penetrate to more sections and benefit more people within society. And with that, I think I gave hopefully a rather comprehensive landscape of women's engagement in violent extremism in Southeast Asia today. And I definitely look forward to having a really engaging discussion. Back to you, Altaf.
Thank you so much, Amelina. Yes, it's really interesting to hear your presentation. I mean, we could really see how female participation has evolved over the years, from being a supportive role to now really taking a front approach in the most weird, warped up way. It's like empowerment through the most wrong way possible. But yes, and in order to counter that, as you rightly stressed, within CSO, within government, within policy design, implementation, execution, and at the grassroots level, there needs to be more representation of women. So with Amelina's presentation, we've actually finished all 4 speakers' presentations. Thank you so much for your presentation. So we are now open for questions and answers. So we have about 30 minutes. We're going to have 2 ways here. I've only seen one question written in the box, so I will use that as the icebreaker. But if anybody wants to actually give a question to themselves, please do so. Unmute yourself, introduce yourself, where you're from, what organization you represent, and your question. So before that, let me just start it off with the first question here. Oh no, I got to make this a bit bigger. I can't see it. Right. This question is to Dr. Daniel. As you mentioned about the tendencies of echo chamber and encrypted platforms that's being used by extremist groups, how can we build an effective counter narrative and counter messaging directed to high-risk groups, since they are mostly in the encrypted platform, such as Telegram? Over to you, Doctor, while we wait for more questions to come in.
Well, I think, yeah, that's a difficult question to answer, isn't it? But I think what we're relying on is the infiltration of these groups. But apart from that, from the public notes, I think this is where the engagement may lie, as well as the, I think, comment links of any, I think, social media threads. Having said that, of course, we're looking at effective narratives as a research at the moment. So hopefully I'll have some findings to share in relation to encrypted platforms by early next year. So in short, I don't have an answer at the moment, but I might have an answer in a couple of months' time.
Okay. So any other questions, people? Hands up.
Chairperson, I have an inquiry to Amelina, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
Wait, go ahead.
I think that there can be, I think, a misconception that having a woman to lead a certain organization or an agency would naturally lead to, I think, resilience or family-oriented, I think, solutions. So I think this is something I think we have to guard ourselves against. So having said that, I'm not defending men, of course, but I'm just saying that having a woman to lead a certain agency or an organization, I think it's not necessarily a solution in relation to adopting resilience and different approaches to CVE as a strategy. So maybe she can comment on that, Amelina. Thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's something that it hasn't been adopted even. So I think perhaps it is a misconception, but I think it's also largely governed by the heavily ingrained gender stereotypes and cultural norms that we have as well, that has largely shaped, especially in certain countries, that I think that's why we are not seeing more female leaders at the front of these sort of male-dominated areas. But even so, I think it's exciting to see more women being appointed, at least not just on the soft approach side, but also on the hard approach. So I guess seeing that the city chief of Malaysia herself was being appointed I think it's a notable achievement towards perhaps greater participation on the strategic level. But of course, as you mentioned, it may or may not be. I think we can argue until tomorrow on that front. I think that's why we are seeing also a lot of more female leaders within the CSO level. But I think also on the CSO level, we need a lot of support from the top-down approach. So there will be something that is interesting to see moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
I think just to add on to this discussion, I think the fact that we have finally acknowledged that the role of women has changed is one. Second, to see more women in leadership roles in any area is actually a plus point. But at the end of it, of course, it has to translate to policies, implementation plans, and the work on the ground itself. It can't just be one thing or another. Okay, we have one comment here from Irene. Oh, sorry, the previous question was actually from Riri Carrero, the one that was asked Dr. Daniel, and I forgot to mention the name. So we have one comment here from Irene. Having a woman in all level of CVE, PVE is one key to attain a more gender-sensitive approach in handling VE. At least this has been discussed widely among various parties in Indonesia. Very true. There is a question from Mansoor, which is, I'm sorry, can Mr. Mansoor resend the question? Because I can't, Mansoor Limba, can you resubmit the question? Because I can't see it, unfortunately. Okay. Question from Ibu Mira. I'd like to know from the panelists the role of cybersecurity force, how the freedom of speech can be protected. So I guess this is, again, I think everybody can answer this question, but again, I think this one is to Daniel. Let me just add on another question so that we could try and answer it at least 1, 2, or 3 as we go. This is from Yuslan Hadi, who's currently contributing in book project along for Center for Religion, Peace and Democracy. His question is, how do you see the dynamic of women participation in violent extremism during this pandemic? Is there any difference in response compared to the normal situation? So, okay, those are 2 questions that we have. The first one is the role of cybersecurity and how you can protect freedom of speech. And the second is, has there been a change in the dynamics of female participation during this pandemic? So perhaps we will start off with Dr. Daniel first, please.
Okay, I think I discussed this in a different platform. So much of this has to do with, again, freedom, the convergence of freedom of speech, hateful extremism, as well as legislation for hateful extremism. I think depending on the country that you look at, this is, and of course, according to constitutional provisions, this can be very much, I think, controversial. If you look at, of course, France now, so this is not cybersecurity per se and how it infringes on personal liberties. But we have an issue in certain countries such as France and Denmark in relation to how we are supposed to tolerate certain, I think, representations of religion and whether it constitutes as insulting or not. But when you look at, I think, countries like Singapore, it does legislate, I think, a high degree of regulatory framework when it comes to hate speech, because it does identify, I think, religion as well as race as fault lines, and I think gut sentiment when it comes to the population. So again, it goes back to, I think, regulation, even in the context of cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you. Amalina?
Yes, thank you so much, Husnan, for your question. So I was just jotting out about 3 points in response to your query. Firstly, in terms of female participation during this pandemic, I think I've highlighted in the slide in my presentation earlier that it's difficult for us to ascertain if there's any change in terms of dynamic of appeal to women in this current state of pandemic, given that a lot of the groups, chat groups, and even on social media platforms do not stay that long. So as of that, I don't have a specific response if the participation has changed, but I wouldn't say there has much changed to date. And then in terms of I wouldn't say there's much change, because the narrative that we are seeing during the pandemic is largely along the lines that the COVID-19 of the pandemic, the rhetoric has been that it's a retribution to China and to the infidels. So along the same kind of rhetoric, there hasn't been huge emphasis on the gendered front. And to the last part of my answer would be that of, in terms of different response, in terms of approach vis-a-vis normal situation, what I would say is that I would argue that the approach won't be that of very different from the normal circumstances. And what I mean normal is the acceleration and the more prevalence of self-radicalization. Because as we know, during the pandemic, there's a lot of lockdown and rampant and more screen timing for a lot of people. And with the increase of radical narratives online, people are more exposed and being situated in the echo chamber at a longer period of time. So I would argue that we can expect that the approach won't be that very much different. I would say that it's still within the same as how we would approach self-radicalization cases. But definitely it will be something that I think speakers tomorrow will be exploring, as well as we look into rehabilitation and reintegration. Yes, so that will be my response.
Okay, we have 2 more questions here. First one to Dr. Noor Huda from Raya, Malaysia. You explained that some men join such organizations in order to show how manly they are, and some women also get radicalized by fashion. What are the challenges faced when addressing gender roles and terrorism? And also, how can we build policies for people exhibiting at-risk behavior? Second question, again, is for Ms. Amalina. Thanks for from Ibu Rivi. Thanks again for your great presentation. You mentioned that the motivation of women and men in joining this famous group is quite different. Can you explore more about that? And at least what I found and read from different sources, there are some similarities both in push and pull factors to these. So, okay, those 2 questions. Let's start it off with Dr. Noor Huda. Over to you.
I think it's a pretty tough question here, Raya. But what I'm trying to say in my presentation is, I want to, what are the challenges faced when addressing gender roles and terrorism? Okay. First of all, it has been acknowledged globally, especially through UN, and a number of literature already acknowledged the need for us to use a gender perspective to deal with violent extremism. One of the main reasons, because the group specifically exploit the very construction of gender, especially how to be a good man and to be a good woman. And this is important through everyday negotiations. We tend to think that the group always use straightforward religious narrative. But in reality, from what my interviews and then engagement with those either women and men, they join, become a committed member through a very slow process of everyday negotiation of identity. It could, many of them started from maybe adopting a specific fashions. So they use their body especially as a way to demonstrate their pettiness. So through embodiment of a specific notion of being man, specific dress, and then gradually after embodiment in behavior, then they started to have an cognitive of the group. And if it's the case, then we have to also understand if we want to counter them with a specific ways, with a similar way, which is we shouldn't really directly engage or counter the narrative of the group through ideological perspective, but we need to also understand the different ways between men and women attracted to violent extremisms. And this is why in a number of my initiative, at least I try to highlight this. To highlight that men attracted to violent extremism is different with a woman. As I mentioned earlier, some men attracted to join violent extremism because of the narrative of masculinity, brute masculinity, a hegemonic type of masculinity as a being man, carry AK-47, the notion of protections. So if it's the case, then we need to counter with the different ways of protecting other Muslims. And different ways of understanding how to be a good man. The same thing with the woman. Women also join, especially in ISIS, also driven by a completely different narrative. Because ISIS smartly also come up with a slick propaganda, encouraging women to join with, let's say, a picture of a normative type of Islam, very well organized, the possibility for you to look after in more clear gender segregation. And this kind of narrative also present in a number of radical groups. So the shifting into normal woman and men into radical groups, you have to look at also the sign and everyday changes of their behavior. And therefore we come up with a sign, what are the sign in terms of behavior? Because all the ideology, they only come with an ideology when they are committed. This is at least from my finding and my perspective.
Thank you, Doc. Amalina?
Yes, I think I'll echo what Dr. Nur Huda has said in my response to this, because he very much also covered those areas as well. I think to note that the fact that there's definitely different in terms of the attraction, as well as in terms of the appeal to both genders. And that is why, because there's a clear segregation between the approach, the appeal to women and men. And so that's why we need a more gendered approach on that front.
Thank you. We have two more questions. And I think anybody in the panel can actually, or perhaps everyone could chip in and answer these. First question, and it's from Mansur Limba. Not too long ago, we had been beating the drum of the defeat of Al-Qaeda with the death of bin Laden. Recently, we were also beating the drum of the end of ISIS with the death of Baghdadi. Do we not tend to focus on the branches rather than the root of faith-based violent extremism? What is your take on this? Second question from Mbak Ruby. Since we are discussing about reintegration, what are the important lessons we learn from, this is actually a question for Kaloy. Since we are discussing about reintegration, what are the important lessons we can learn from your work on reintegration to respond and deal with returnees? What did you do to increase social acceptance using peace building tools? Further elaboration on this question is, because of the context of violent extremism and conflict are different, what would be the challenge when bringing ex-combatants or ISIS travelers back to the community? So who would like to give a shot first? for the first question by Mr. Mansoor on how to focus.
I'll take the first question, Chairperson.
Okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to relate this to, I think, the French situation. What we had was that a number of the perpetrators, at least in Europe, those who conducted terror attack, they had gone through the de-radicalization, rehabilitation, and reintegration training in prison. And a lot of questions were posed to, I think, the government, to the state, about the effectiveness of these modules. My response to that is that, yes, it's one thing to look into the effectiveness of these modules. I think, on the other hand, those who are in PCBE need to look at the bigger picture. A lot of the drivers as well as enablers of extremism and terrorism are social, political, economic, and becoming various forms and linkages. And these drivers change. So if the triggers continue to exist in society, and they will continue to exist in society, and so whether we look into effectiveness of the training that happens in prisons is one thing, but when they go out into society, they are immediately re-exposed to such triggers. I'll give you one example of what happened a number of weeks ago. Our former Prime Minister said something which was, I think, problematic in relation to French colonial history. Right? I think probably the whole world knew about it. And what was unbeknownst to him was that a former detainee, probably the most prominent detainee in Malaysian history, said something to one of his handlers. He said that, this is what I was saying all those many years ago, and now he's agreeing with me. So, these kind of sentiments are there. The triggers are there in society. So I think this is the problem. Whenever we look at the difference, the trade-off between security and resilience or societal approach, is that as good as your modules may be in prison, when you go out into society, there will still be these triggers. And so we have to look at, I think, resolving some of the bigger issues as well, which is, of course, rightfully to say, not necessarily within our scope. So that's why this thing will continue. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chalito?
Yes, maybe I would like to share one specific experience in how we deal with the Abu Sayyaf who returned to the folds of the law. What we actually do is expose them to the other world, no? Because they've been so exposed to the violent world and in the jungles, kidnapping, and on disarmed encounters. And we bring them to fish markets or vegetable farms. And then they realize that how, they have so much resources in their own island of Basilan. They can, so in the process also, they become interested in fishing and in farming. So we help them, capacitate them, and give them support so that they can. This is reintegration in action, not just reintegration to the society in general, but really reintegration to the productive world. So, and now they realize that they can be productive, and then they can earn a lot from farming or fishing. And that's one. Number two, really one lesson I learned, or we learned, is as Ruby pointed out, this is conflict. It's a little different from violent extremism. No, I think one difference is when this former violent groups, when then they give up or they seek to return to the law, they are actually heavily militarized. No? Even their identity of their unit is named after the particular military unit that are taking care of them. And so that first important task really is how to civilianize, even the identity, for them to reassume their real identity and not just a particular member of a particular military unit holding them. Okay? So this is again real reintegration. Well, these are just two examples or lessons that we have learned in our work in reintegration. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chalito. That's interesting, actually. You've literally made a good point. You need to actually re-civilianize civilianize people. And at some point, some were once civilians, or those that were born into it will have been there for generations. How do you actually civilianize that? It is a big challenge. Do we have any more questions? We actually only have 5 minutes left before this session ends. So maybe just while we wait to see if there are any more questions, and I don't see any hands up either. Maybe I would like to also just throw in a question, and it's actually to all the speakers. You've talked about the evolution of the landscape of how people become radicalized. Become terrorists. And Dr. Huda did that exceptionally well. Now we also looked at there is the need to reintegrate, but there are certain challenges to that. And the challenge is further amplified with not only COVID-19, but the new world of the digital space and the gender lens that needs to be there. Now, when we're looking at all of that, at the end of it, it's actually building a community that is resilient towards how to be radicalized or to be easily influenced. How do you do that? How do you do that with the challenges of technology, with the challenges of how the fall of ISIS physically has led to an opening online? Maybe we can start with Huda.
Okay, Altaf. So I want to share a bit based on my personal work helping release convicted terrorists to integrate back society, including returned ISIS fighters, into a very simple formula. Of course, it requires a number of contexts and adjustments. The first approach will be triple H approach, Altaf. The first H will be hard. To engage them, you have to win their trust. As our brother from Southern Philippines already mentioned, you need to engage them, because understanding doesn't mean supporting. Understanding their process of getting in, it doesn't mean that we support them. And this is important for society to understand, because the cost not understanding them will be allowing them to go back to their old network, which is what we call recidivism. In Indonesia, we are seeing case of recidivism around 11.39%. This is what IPEC said. So yeah, it's smaller compared to other criminal, but this is the first, engaging them. Otherwise, their whole group will engage them. So we have to win their trust. And to win their trust, the number one, heart. And number two will be hand. Transform their energy. Hand will mean, give them skill. In the language of our brother from Southern Philippines, civilize them, because they have been living in militarized masculinity type of work. So we give them a different type of alternative. In my case, you see in my cafe, we channel their energy from using AK-47 to fry duck. But we have to follow, and not only about the cafe, also about the different passion of each individual. Basically help them to find their calling. It means, in terms of a theoretical framework, we have to first disengage them from violence rather than de-radicalize first. Because if we obsess with the de-radicalize and then we confront with their ideology first, they will reject right away. It's very difficult to, and the last one will be head, which is de-radicalizations. It means disengagement come first before de-radicalizations. This is how at individual level. And at community level, as you said, we have to come up with the notion 4B. Number one, which will be band. They need to band. They need to have a new band of brothers, because previously they have been living in toxic social relations, social relations that always encourage them to continue to do the like encourage them to continue the jihad, to the violence, because it's the same thing with PTSD. Military people will not, a former military will not be happy to consult if they have a problem with the conflict, for instance. The same with this guy, if they participate, because for them, if they do not continue to their jihad, they are emasculate them, So number one would ban. We give them a completely social network. And then second, another one will be bond. After that, hopefully they can bond, create a healthy bond. After bond, they will have the ability to bend the existing normal to be flexible. Going back to the next question, with the previous guy asking, but we shouldn't, celebrate the winning of Al-Qaeda or, like the killing of Bin Laden or Baghdadi, because it's true, it has to do with specific type of Islam they understand, which is what I call it imagine type of Islam. Ignoring understanding Islam through context and historical perspective. And they always cherry picking specific verses or historical period within Islam to justify their very ideology. They shouldn't continue like that. That is also, I fully agree with Muhammad, with Amalina Nasir, with other speakers as well, the need to nuance the way we engage them. And then now in my program at the moment, because in the last 10 years or so, I have been engaging directly with the former. Now in the last 2 years, together with my team, I have been working at a micro level, micro local leader, which is in Indonesia called RT RW or Lurah. We're preparing the community. We're preparing the community before release with a 3 approach, what I call it KSU. Number one will be knowledge. We have to teach the community who the hell is this guy, what is his involvement, long before, 6 months before the release. And number 2, we give them skill. Okay, after knowing about them, what kind of skill do you need to have? Empathy, listening, understanding, and last one will be understanding. Understanding it has to do with context. Therefore, now we have a project in East Java and Central Java. I'm working closely with the governor of Central Java to understand what kind of regulation in specific area, which they for instance, in one area in Central Java called Brebes, for instance, they have a water kind of a tourism. So we encourage, because there is a regulation in the government, this is what we promote tourism. So we channel the energy of this farmer to work in this kind of a environment. So I'm very happy now, graduate of my team program, create multi-level marketing of a goodness. So member get members, the former reform one, recruit the other one, recruit the other one. So it's genuinely community ownership type of work. Top down is critical, but bottom up, it's far more, for me, it's a much more sustainable, And going back, what I always obsessed with the social entrepreneur, you have to have something that makes them meaningful. And then beyond the existing program that heavily rely on donors. Yeah, I still accept donors who don't. But how can I use that money so that, it can be self-sustained? For instance, and I got the donor, then you see it, Ruang Ngobrol, the cafe, get the donor, Ruang Ngobrol now, hopefully we get AdSense and then others. So hopefully I like that. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
Thank you, Doctor. Perhaps, Mr. Calito, could you also answer that question and perhaps focus a little bit on structural transformation?
Yeah, let me just say very, very briefly that I agree with the comment of Dr. Sam, Brother Sam in the chat room, that as long as the structural violence exists, as long as people see and feel the injustices, it is very easy for violent extremist groups to arouse, to recruit, to organize, to mobilize people towards violence. And the key really is address this structural injustice and the structural violence, the historical injustice. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we've actually, my watch says 5 minutes past over time. So I think with that, we actually have come to the end of our session. I would like to again thank all the speakers Dr. Nurul Huda, Mr. Chalito, Prof. Daniel, and Ms. Amalina for your presentation, for your insights, and for sharing your knowledge. To the participants, thank you so much for having participated. We look to hear more questions from you from the next plenary session. So with that, I end this session. Thank you very much. And back to you, Mbak Ruby.
Thank you very much, Altaf. Applause for Altaf for guiding our session and diving together with us in understanding more about the new trends, as well as how we actually using our old tools and modifying and applying for the new challenges that we all facing relating with returnees, either travelers or also ex-combatant. So I think we should give rights to our body. We are going to have a break, an hour, and then join with us back by 1 p.m. We have a very nice plenary, because it's focusing on not criticizing, but reviewing what the government's policy relating with the returnees. We will have a context of Indonesia, Philippines, and also Australia. So your feedback relating with our current policy is very, very meaningful, because the next session will be really looking at whether our current policy is really, it's correct. It is going to give an answer about the all, a problem that we are facing, as well as actually whether the current policy is really listening what people actually propose, whether it is in the public, social media, or any other platform. So please, friends, take your time, eat well, rest well, and then come back by 1 p.m. Thank you. I have to close now. But you still can just leave, and because the forum is still open, we just break for now.